Hey, everybody, welcome back to another episode of Railroad Empires. Tonight, we're going to be talking about terrain and how we're doing it. Uh, as always, don't forget to comment, subscribe, and click that little bell icon for notifications on when we do our next show. Before we get started into our terrain, we did have a question from Sparky107107 on last episode of bus wiring and wiring in general. Here's this question. I have heard not to run the bus wire in a loop like the track is. Leave it open on one end. Is that true? And if so, why?
Yes.
Tim, let's start with you.
True. So, because there's a frequency associated with it. You know, some people like to say it's the argument of DC versus AC. It's really neither. It's a square wave DC, but it's pulsing and it has a frequency. So over a very short bus, that may not be a problem, but it is also a best practice. But over a long enough wire, that latency or the delay that happens at the close to speed of light that happens in a copper in a medium can end up with a couple of your square waves being slightly offset from each other. And that slight offset can cause some cancellation or frequency manipulation. You'd have the same problem, and you could look at how AC behaves. And you can Google and look this up just if you want to understand the particular details of how you can deal with constructive and deconstructive interference. So you may end up with some interference. So first, no, absolutely. What you want is a branching structure like a tree that ends up at dead ends or dead branches. Also, something that very few of us do, but is a good practice, is to put a terminating capacitor on the end of your DCC line. That won't matter over a very small layout, but if you are having signal problems where it's having some issue or you're dealing with some latency where it's having to resend signals, that happens on larger layouts. The best way to do that, and I just do it as a standard practice, is put that little capacitor between the ends of my two lines, my two DCC, north and south rail DCC signals at the end of those branch terminus. I've got one on my top level, one on my bottom level for each of those separate power districts. So, and you can Google the capacitance that you want to have, how many microfarad of a cap that you want to put on the end of the line.
Now, is it a cap or a resistor?
I'm pretty sure it's a cap, but I could be wrong. I don't remember. It's been a while since I built that. I think it's a cap.
I mean, it might be a cap for DCC because it the short circuit detection.
That whole idea is
resistor would show up as a short, but I know a lot of data links they terminate with a resistor.
Well, you need to put a load on certain things. For example, those that use PC power supplies or computer power supplies, which I'm generally not a great fan of because they're horribly inaccurate and they fluctuate a lot. It's okay for certain things. I mean, powering tortoises, for example, that aren't very frequency sensitive, voltage sensitive, fine. But you need to put a pretty heavy resistor on them, a half a watt or higher. Most of us use porcelain resistors to put on there to pull the load up on that. You're doing the same thing for DCC. You're putting the load, a bit of a load out of the end of the line so that you can terminate that line and make sure that you have good signal strength throughout the extension of that line, regardless of how long it is.
All right, Tim, what's your take?
I'm the same as Andy because if you connect both ends, you could actually wind up with a repeat signal. You could send a command, and then you wind up with a lot of trash commands on your data link, which is basically what DCC is. It's a data link that you're powering off of. You wind up with that signal just constantly cycling through your layout.
Yeah, Dave also mentioned something about the track work for the same consideration. Again, I don't think that's as big. It depends. It's all about the size of the layout, whether this becomes a problem or not. On very small layouts, not necessarily a problem. As you grow in layout size, complexity is true too, but size for sure, you're probably going to want to insulate the rail so that it doesn't make an electrical loop because, again, it's a frequency and you can get some problems there. But you're also likely to want power districts anyway. So, and having circuit protection, at a very minimum, having some circuit protection or a few circuit breakers.
All right. And Lloyd, what do you think?
I agree.
Wow. Great answer.
I mean,
there, Lloyd.
you know me with electricity or electronics, blah. So I'll
I
agree
know
with that.
it's mostly
Andy.
over your head. It's fine.
Oh yeah, it's way over my head. Where
And if
do you
I'm being
plug?
honest, go
I
ahead.
mean, I was gonna say, where do you plug the black one, black wire or the red wire?
Oh jeez. Oh jeez. All right.
Okay.
So next episode, we're gonna go ahead and replace Lloyd. We'll find somebody. I'm just kidding. My take on it is honestly, I never really even thought about it. I just always dead ended at the end of my benches, and had a start point somewhere in the middle. I never really thought about why. It's just something I've always done. I think that's a fairly satisfactory set of answers. So let's go ahead and jump on over to Tim and see how he's doing terrain tonight.
All right. Well, first off, the tools I usually use for terrain, and I see you were using yours there, Robert, are my utility knife and my hot wire cutter.
Oh, I love my hot wire cutter.
Yes, they are handy as heck. And they come with two attachments. So they come with a straight wire and a straight rod and the elbow rods. They come with two elbow rods and one straight rod, so you can actually do angles. The nichrome wires, somewhat difficult to get a little hold of sometimes, depending on whether you have a hobby shop available. But they are very handy. I've tried to make one before. I had some success. But
I was just going to ask you because I'm actually running into a similar issue, and maybe we can kind of nail the head at the same time. Can you use any wire, or does it have to be the nichrome?
The nichrome wire is basically the same thing. That's somewhat in a light bulb, similar to the tungsten that's in there. It can heat up without burning out. Regular wire, if you get it too hot, it'll burn itself apart. It'll break, or it'll just burn up.
Cool.
So if you get too much current flowing through it, it'll just burn up. The nichrome wire can handle that, current to a certain higher point and the temperature to a higher point, so it doesn't break as easy. So they want you to actually use the nichrome. But then what I do is I'll cut out my basic shape with my knife. Then I'll come back in with my hot wire cutter and I'll form everything together. And then to glue everything together, I use my liquid nails again. And then I can take sandpaper if I want to smooth things out a little bit. Since I'm using foam, it's easy to just sand it. Oh, yeah, cameras. Let's get rid of that. There we go. So I can take just sandpaper and just sand it. Sand off the rough spots. It doesn't take much force. Doesn't take a real heavy grit sandpaper. Because if you get too much of a bite, you'll start ripping your foam. But it sands it fairly smooth, fairly quickly. My mountainside here is actually the top of it's loose because it's removable. So I can get in and access my tracks underneath of it. And I can actually show you the layers of foam that's glued together. And the hot wire cutter will cut through those layers. Not too badly. You just gotta go a little slower because if you go too fast, you'll break the wire. But it will cut through. The layers there. Get that repositioned. I have not. Have not actually pinned it yet. It's gonna eventually. This is eventually gonna be pinned into place. where it stays or goes back in every time, the same place every time. Right now it's not, so I got to line everything back up. Back here on the back side of things. And then my flat ground, I'll just paint it and put my scenery on top of it. But on my hills and mountainsides, what I usually do, actually, I'm going to make this wider here since we're here. I'll use plaster cloth on my hills where I need it. Still want to be on a rock cut. And when it's glued, I can usually just, well, I get the cut down deep enough. Usually just pick it back out. So, and then I take my plaster cloth and I'll soak it in some water. Get it all nice and wet and soaky, soggy. And I'll bring it over here and I'll lay it in position. And I'll work it. The reason why I'd go ahead and do the plaster cloth on my rock surfaces or my uneven terrain is because if I want to attach rocks, I can come back in and just take plaster rocks, attach plaster to the back of them, and stick them on, which I'll do some probably next episode, or the episode for the scenery, because I count my rock faces as scenery. And I just continue to work the plaster cloth until all the little bubble holes pretty much disappear. Keep getting my fingers wet so I can keep the plaster cloth wet. And then if I have to, sometimes what I will do to get some of these holes gone is I will come back in, I will put a skim coat of drywall mud over top of it. But usually once you get the next layer of plaster cloth on, because you overlap your layers, you don't put them directly over top of each other, you just put them, like they suggest, 2 inches of overlap. Once you get that next layer of plaster cloth on here, that gives you plenty of extra plaster in that area to do a covering. So here we'll get another sheet. And what I'm using right now over here with water, or to get my water, is I've got a pie pan. A flat cookie sheet pie pan, small one. I got some water in it. I normally have a big tub of water, but I couldn't find it this afternoon. As you can see, the holes somewhat disappear. You work the layers together. And if I still have issues with holes showing up, I can either re-wet it and try again in that area, play around with it some more, or like I said, I come back in with some plaster, some drywall mud, joint compound.
Since we don't have any questions for Tim at this time, do we want to hop over and see what Andy's working on?
All right. So I know we've covered ground goop a few times in the past. I don't know that I have exactly. A few other people have it. I have a somewhat slightly mixture, but I'm gonna make some of it real quick, and then we'll talk about the carving. So the key to mine is, and I build cedar in 3 different methodologies. 2 of those are solid structure. They're styrofoam, dense styrofoam or pink styrofoam modules that are layers of laminate together, and I cover it in this ground mixer that I'm going to cover. The other one is solid, but is made of some form of one of the various types of florist foam. I use this anywhere that, and I didn't used to, but I've started using this anywhere where I have dense forestation, because it's more expensive, and I only use it as a surface, not as the structural, but it allows me to plant trees super easy, and it speeds up the process considerably. It's easy to work with, and I don't use a lot of ground goop on it. We'll cover that. The third method is a technique of making semi-hollow mountains, where I basically make shaped silhouettes, and then I wrap it. So I've wrapped it traditionally in bed quilting, and then soaked this down with ground goop. Although I've been talking about experimenting with geodesic with spray foam, but I think we may cover that in some future episode. But the key to mine is ground goop. So the Scenic clay is the one that's super popular. I use that a lot. It's fine. I also use this paper mache in a bag you can buy. It's fine. I've also used a whole lot of just cellulose insulation. That's probably my preference. It just takes a little more time to work up. Scenic clay is a little more expensive. I also don't use an exact mixture. A lot of people do. I mix it up to the texture that I want. There's times when I want a smoother consistency. When I was making my rivers, for example, I wanted a finer, smoother consistency, and I used more paper mache, more paint, and less water, less vermiculite or no vermiculite. I don't always use vermiculite. Vermiculite you'll find it in the plant potting section. I think it's used to aerate soil or something. It's also used a long time ago as insulation in concrete block, poured down in concrete block. So you find it in a few sources. You can get it in a couple different consistencies. This is a relatively fine consistency. I bought it in really large sack thinking I'd save some money, and it's a coarser consistency, but I've just run it through a small food processor and change the consistency of it, because you want something somewhat fine, but what you want is something that gives you a little bit of texture so that you can get some bite on it. Otherwise, it's most of the time, unless you're doing something fairly like the bottom of riverbeds, you end up with something that's a little too, it's not dense enough to work with. It doesn't give a bite. It wants to slide off stuff. And then paint, latex paint. Now, I used to use a much stronger paint mixture, and now I've ended up going to where I use, a lot of people say use just a touch of water to kind of loosen the mixture up. Now I end up using a thinner mixture of paint, a little bit more water, and I'm happier with that result. Now, the original consistency, the original recipe for this from Lou Sassy 50 years ago or something, was equal parts of paint, vermiculite, Scenic clay, touch of water, little spoonful of whatever, some kind of disinfectant, so that you could Lysol or something like that. So Pine Sol, Lysol, something like that. And he used PVA, white glue or PVA. I have tried it that way. Where I originally found this recipe was from Mike Confalone, and he did not use the PVA, the white glue in it. I've tried it with the white glue. There are times when that's a good mixture. I also use latex paint, paper mache, no vermiculite, and white glue, making roads, for example, where I want a nice smooth surface like a dirt road. I like that process using the white glue there, so it's kind of hard. I like mine to stay somewhat rubbery. It's easier to plant stuff into. It also works really good since these are modules. They're very fault tolerant. They can take a hit because they stay somewhat rubbery. So, and I also mix the consistency, like I said, I don't use an exact recipe. I mix it till I've got the consistency I want. I like it to have enough bite that it'll stick to a spoon on its own. That it'll have some consistency, some bite to it. Makes it easy to work with. It's easy to work with your hands, I suppose. Although Ralph is famous for picking on me, I would not like to get my hands dirty with this stuff. But I did break some gloves, so I can't do that. But I also like this little rubber spatula, man. This thing is the bee's knees for making it up. My favorite little trick is these little artist blades or a canvas blade. I broke numerous metal ones finally. I eventually wear them out. So I need to probably buy another metal one sometime. But they do wear out because my whole layout is covered in this stuff. And I've put down, I figured it out one time somewhere in the neighborhood of 100 something square footage of this stuff so far. And I've covered my entire layout for less than $100 worth of material. So quite cheap to work with. So that's what you end up with. Fairly thick consistency, makes it easy to work. If you're doing something like dirt roads, you might want to try the PVA, experiment with it, see if you like the wood glue in it. But I also don't use vermiculite for that because I want it smooth. If you're doing something like a river basin or creek basin, it's really nice where you want to get that little texture where the grass kind of hangs over the dirt is falling out below it. When I do that, I also leave the vermiculite out, but I also still leave the PVA out in that case. So that's your consistency. Now let's talk about some of the mediums that we work with and the way I assemble this stuff. So this is a kind of weird module that I want to show you and talk about. So this module is going to be installed, according to the camera, it's going to be installed at an angle, hanging from the layout with this section, the deck below, allowing me to hide lighting in this section, lighting the deck below. This is one of the areas where the top deck has to impede into the lower deck more than I would like because it needs to hold up bridge trestles or bridge bits for the bridge that goes across the aisle. So I built these modules as separate pieces. This piece has a vertical rib to give it some strength so that I can get it to hold that angle up so it's mounted from behind. But now I've got these things right. Now I'm going to put these couple modules together. Now, for gluing this stuff down, I like Gorilla Glue. There are consequences. I started out using liquid nails for projects, and I used it for a while, and it was great. I had no problem with it, and I've talked about it and recommended people use it. But what happened to me over time was as I carried modules in and out, as I took them down, as I was working on them, eventually the stuff started to turn loose on me. If you are doing something entirely permanent and nothing's ever going to move, sure, fine, not a problem. But if you're going to mess with the modules much, or if you want to cut into them and change them, and see, I have a tendency to change things fairly often. That's part of the reason that I really like working with foam is that I can just tear into this at any time and change my layout to however I want, however I want to. I take a utility knife, cut into this thing, and I'm off to the races to making it. I've made significant changes, and I'm not afraid to make changes. Now, the key to Gorilla Glue or polyurethane glue is that it's water activated. So you're going to need to spray your surfaces. So we're going to spray the glue, spray our receiving surface. Doesn't need to be wet, just moist. Also, you'll see that I have pins in these modules. What I've done is just chop some pins and got the angle right so that I could get a little bit of lateral strength where I'm losing it otherwise. And that'll make as solid of a bond as if this had been a solid sheet of styrofoam. But I couldn't plan all of this out and figure out the way the bridge needed to intersect, trying to work in large pieces because it has to fit in a very kind of narrow area, set up off the ground, in a very uncomfortable spot to try to work with it. Now, I'm using this florist foam because here where the bridge goes over, this is just a lot of static grass. Here, this is going to be tree covered as the trees come down from both sides of this valley, where this goes across the bridge and straight into a tunnel. It's tree covered on the top. The trees kind of wrap this in kind of a U shape. So we're going to do the same thing. Also, I use Gorilla Glue for this. Since we're not getting enough of this glued down that I could show you, and it won't be hard enough that I could show you some of the carving techniques. You can have some fun with it when I'm carving. That has become my favorite tool, just to I think they call it a matte knife. Typically, I call it a wallpaper knife, but a matte knife. Matte knife. That's my favorite. I will use a hot wire occasionally, but for the most part, it's just poking holes for wiring and stuff. This is one of my favorites for working with the green stuff specifically with the florist foam. This works pretty good. And if you really want to have some fun and let some stress out, there are real tools for doing this scenery work as well. I thoroughly enjoy this process right here, man. If you've had a stressful week, you can do some serious ground shaping and have a good time doing so. I don't think you want a big, large scale, scale gas powered. Probably not, but these little cheap electric, trimmers are pretty spectacular. So
We were really hoping that he wouldn't break out the chainsaw and show everybody as crazy, but we can't really help it. Sorry, y'all.
It's Andy. He's. I mean,
listen, I'll tell you what.
Crazy.
Laugh all you want, and then go try it. And tell me how much fun it is, how fast you can build a layout. We did on the build show. We did this, and I went from a couple pieces of styrofoam and a piece of gator board, all the way to ground cover, all the way to dirt in a 1 hour show. So you can take some pieces of material leaned up against the wall in your garage and glue them down. Give them glue 10 or 15 minutes to set up because this stuff goes off in a heartbeat. Take the chainsaw to it, wipe it down or blow it off with the air compressor. Throw some ground goop on it, hit it with dust. You could build a lot of layout area in an evening.
My wife's been missing a steak knife for years that I've been using for foam work.
Similar,
it removes a lot of material fast.
Absolutely. Well, that's why I like this kind of single blade hacksaw handle. Also, it lets you get some curvature if you're trying to bend some curvature into stuff. This is handy on its own as well. So the only thing I might add to this before I finish my segment up is if you're working with this stuff is expandable, which is a benefit. This adhesive, it is a benefit that it's expandable, but you need to put some weight on what you're working on or pin it down real good because it will pop up. But it'll also fill gaps because of that. So, and that's
we do have a question for you, Eddie.
Sir?
We do have a question for you.
All right.
So, Dan Cohen asks, would you use the ground goop on an industrial section? What applications would you use that ground goop for?
So I use the ground goop to cover basically everything. So, in the real world, not much is actually flat. There's kind of undulations everywhere. So I cover basically everything with the ground goop, even relatively flat areas. That way you get those slight undulations that you would expect to be there. I cover everything with it. I cover roads with it. Now, what I do for buildings is, for example, we'll cover a little bit more of this on the building section, is where buildings are going to go, I put a frame under the structure. And that frame forces the structure to stay in registration. And then I'll just cover that stuff with a piece of cellophane or, a piece of whatever cling film. And you put my ground goop everywhere. pull the ground goop or pull the cellophane or the whatever cling film off. And it takes the ground goop right up to a blunt edge, right where the structure's going to go. So the structure's almost setting down into a slight indentation. So, yeah, I use it everywhere. Absolutely everywhere. The only thing I do is like roads. If they're concrete or something, I will frame them and I'll use the ground goop right up to the road. And then I'll use some other medium to build that road with. And we're going to talk about that in a future show about our road techniques.
All right, so I think we don't have any more questions for Andy, so let's jump over and see what Robert's working on.
Awesome. So I saw a question in the chat from, I think it was Human City Junction, asking if any of us use, reference photos to do our terrains off of. And I actually did. So I'm basically modeling part of North Tacoma, just because I've driven up there a few times. I really dig it. I like the scenery. I like the way it kind of merges together. So in this photo, and this is what I'm using to kind of build this terrain up over here on the layout, is you can see from the bottom here, it's flat. And then it comes up at what I'm guesstimating is about a 40 to 50 degree slope. And then you have track level. And then it comes up again another 30 or 40 degrees, I would think. And then there's residential back here in the back behind all the bushes. So based off of that, what I've done is I've went ahead and made a few templates just to kind of see if I can get an eye. So I've got a 37, 40, 45, 50, and 55. I do have a 60, but it's obviously wrong, so I'm not even going to bother with that. So at this point, what I'm doing is I'm just setting these right up against the risers, just to kind of see which one looks more accurate and which one looks best. Now, I will more than likely kind of alternate them and change them around as I go down the riser here, so that it's not all uniform and nice and even all the way around. It's got some undulation to it. But the one that looks the closest to me is going to be between the 40 and 45 degree angle. The 37 just looks a little too shallow of a cut. So what I did while I was thinking about this was I went through all my risers and I put an X every fourth piece of upright foam. So here, right? The idea is that I can use those as a reference marker of where things need to go, and they're just far enough apart that I can put my ground cover there, which we'll go over in another episode. Andy mentioned that a lot of us were kind of talking about using geodesic foam. I first saw that done by Eric Siegel on a video he did about making tunnels and mountains and things. So what I learned on that episode was that you put down a piece of screen door screen, you mix up your geodesic foam, and you just run it over it really gently and really thin to make a sheath. So instead of using like plaster cloth where it's the cloth impregnated with plaster, this is a cloth impregnated with foam. So I'm going to use that as my cover to start building things up. It should give me enough bite so that I can put like trees in. It should also be stable enough that I can put roads on it and buildings and other things like that. So in building up this back platform here, I actually got a little bit crazy with it, believe it or not. So these are the silhouettes I used that I made up on my own. It's got a flat nose here so that it sits right up against the riser. I've got my angle for the slope in here, and then I notched it down 1 inch to hold the platform itself. So if I can get this one out of here without knocking everything over, this is essentially what you'll see.
You know, out of all of us, I think Lloyd's the only one the term crazy may not apply to.
That's probably true. So this gives me a really nice platform. It's 1 inch thick and spread out. I have these spread out every 4 or 5 pieces, or yeah, I think it's 5 actually. 5 uprights apart. There's enough back there that it gives me enough structural integrity that I don't have to worry about it drooping down or anything like that once I put the full sheet up there. So it's pretty much what I've been working on this week. Also kind of got the tunnel portal meshed in, because in Tacoma, in this part of Tacoma, what we actually see is that there's a 1 mile long tunnel that goes underneath the mountain underneath a hill. On top of the hill, it's a full urban landscape. You can also find that kind of a thing over in Seattle. They do it a lot over there. There's probably 3 or 4 tunnels that do that. But I thought that was really neat. So over here at the end, let's see if I can get you slightly better. So I've got the back brace for the tunnel portal here. I've got front braces so it maintains the proper height, but then I've got it all set and flat, and there will be another piece up here that'll run all the way across the top. So that'll give me ribs for the inside of the portal, the inside of the tunnel, as well as another surface to put more residential scene on. The back scene, this back part here is about 2 inches higher than the front. So I'll be able to slope that up a little bit and build it up, slope it up for a road and make it look really cool. I'm not entirely sure where I'm at on time. Did I lose connection? Okay. All right. So Okay, I was getting nothing from nobody. I thought I dropped connection and was just sitting here talking to myself. Awesome. So in this part of Tacoma, where this is going to sort of depict, what happens is after the train tracks and the train tracks and the slope and everything else, it goes down to about an 8-foot wide parking area, grassy area, and then a 2-lane road, and then sidewalk and grass and park. And right after that, it slopes right down into the sound. So there's basically, oceanish water right there, because it's not quite an ocean yet. So that's what this is going to be. This whole front end of the layout's going to be all water scene. I'll have road coming through, a little bit of parking. It should be pretty sweet when I'm done with it. I'm a little nervous about the water. That's about all I got, Ari. If we don't have any questions, we can probably scoot on over to Lloyd.
Yeah, I think we're good. If we want to go jump over Lloyd, let's do it.
Question is Lloyd even there?
Huh? I'm there. So I'm up.
Yes, sir.
Okay. Well, seems like everybody's gone through styrofoam. That's what I use for my mountains. So I'll show you different things I use. Like everybody else, I use the foam cutter sometimes. I find it easier to cut with my X-Acto knife. And then what I do once I'm done with the mountain, it's not fully shaped. It's just basically square. Then what I do is I come with the same thing as Tim. I've got rolls of plaster cloth that I'll put all over the place. I don't know if you can see up to here. That's one part I did with plaster cloth, but it's just a base. Because after that, I use sculpture mold. Pretty thin though. Just kind of cover the holes of the plaster cloth. And also, I've made a lot of castings of rocks when I had nothing to do. And what I do is I'll be putting this, I don't know if the camera can show, but I'll be putting some castings along the plaster cloth and finish it with sculpture mold all around. So that's one of my landscapes. Another landscape I do, because I've got different types of landscapes. I use ceiling tiles. So basically what I do is I just pile them up. And what I'll do once it's all glued, I'll carve them with a fork to give it the ridges of like a slate, like a cliff or a mountain made of slate. So it's basically pretty much flat with all grooves. So I'll use a fork and just scrape along until I get the right texture I want. You'll be able to see that if you go on my Facebook page or some of the videos I've done, you'll be able to see the final result. I'll probably be able to show it to you in 2 weeks. So that's another terrain I do. For most of the flat stuff, I use sculpture mold. And because sculpture mold is rough, it's not smooth. It gives like bumps in the terrain, and it doesn't make it just uniform if you want. Again, I'll show you that in 2 weeks from now, different types. So I've got the sculpture mold with the plaster cloth. I've got ceiling tiles. I also have just plain, no, I still use plaster cloth. So yeah, I guess that's my main tool, my main item I use for my cliffs. Like I said, I like just to go with my X-Acto knife and just cut away and sculpt. See if I can bring. No, I don't have enough wire. But pretty much my layout is pretty much flat. Here, yeah, I can show you. Oh, I can.
Hey, Lloyd, do you use any of the Stanley rasp or anything like that for shaping your foam?
If I use what?
The Stanley rasps, or like files or anything like that?
The Sureform tool.
Yeah, the Sureform tools. Yeah.
I use one every now and then. I forgot about that.
Okay, so this is a gorge I'm working on. Trying to get a good picture of it. So on one side, I do have, like you can see, my ceiling tiles are all piled up, getting ready to sculpt it with my with a fork, and the rest is pretty much going to be the same thing once I'm done, because in the entire area it's all shale. It's all shale walls, and since I've got the camera here, so the end results. Okay, so that's the end result of ceiling tiles. So since I've got my camera, as you can see, most of it is flat. The ground is flat, and it's undulated. I can't see if you guys are seeing it. Yeah, so it's a bumpy ground, and I get that from the sculpture mold. Here. So all my, like I said, the two big items I use is sculpture mold and whoops, sorry. Oh no.
Lost the camera, Lloyd.
You lost. Ah.
Excuse me. Ari, is that the tool you're talking about? That little yellow one?
Yeah, I use a Sureform
Yeah,
too.
I use that a lot. Absolutely. There.
Camera's back. Okay.
And Lloyd, are you using anything different to glue your foam down with? Are you using like liquid nails, or what's your?
Sorry, I couldn't hear you.
What kind of glue are you using for your foam?
Well, I'm just using for my ceiling tiles. For my ceiling tiles, I'll just use white glue. The same thing for my styrofoam. I use white glue, and it does what I want, because believe me, I can't remove it. So if I have to do a bit of sculpting, I don't have to worry about everything coming off. So that's about it.
We do have a question for you, Lloyd.
Yeah.
Do you know what your ceiling tiles are made out of? Is it like a homosode, or what's the fiber material in those things?
Oh, gee, very good question. It's looks like fiber.
Probably
It's
cellulose.
asbestos.
So I guess that's fiber.
It's recycled.
Yeah, it's not some sort of cellulose fiber board.
Yeah.
Wood fiber even.
It's just that this makes a lot of dust. So I've got a vacuum cleaner right beside me every time I'm cutting pieces.
So that's a good question too. How do you guys clean up? I use a shop vac all the time, constantly when you're working, because you get that foam, especially, it sticks to you so bad when you're carving.
What's this cleanup thing you're talking about?
Robert's not got to that stage yet.
I actually spent a freaking week cleaning up my layout.
I've got a little 2.5 gallon shop vac, one of those little portable shop vacs that I use.
Yeah,
I'm a bit crazy. I'm a bit crazy. I clean up every day.
You're doing homework. If you don't clean up, you will track that through the house. Like, I got a cat, and I'll see pink foam on his belly as he like walks through the house. I was like, that's how I know I didn't clean up good enough. When I see it upstairs.
Well, the pink stuff is statically charged. One of the joys of working with this green stuff, which again I can't use it for everything, but one of the joys of working with it is it's not statically charged. So when you cut it, it just kind of, you can pick it up the same as it would if it were little paper particles.
Another thing I forgot to mention, another thing I use, tool I use, are dentists, what do you call them?
Picks.
Picks. Yeah, I've got different picks, and that's what I use for doing a bit of doing the sculpting of my scalpel mold when it's dry, or even sometimes I use plaster if I want something very specific. So those tools are pretty handy.
The thing you gotta watch with plaster cloth is it can be messy. I didn't even realize I was getting it everywhere a while ago, and apparently I got it on some of my trains, and they were sitting several inches away.
That's why I stopped using plaster. I mean, to each their own, whatever works for you. I just don't like plaster. I don't like working with plaster. It's a doggone mess. Everything you touch, it's just, I don't like working with it.
Well, it depends. Yeah, I wouldn't do it on my layout. I've got a little room in the back where I'll prepare up my plaster and just show up here, and I've got plastic that I'll put around my tracks. So no, there's no mess.
Well, there's a mess.
I'm a no mess guy.
And it's fine if that suits the job. It's up to each person. Use what works for you. Not a problem. People use plaster forever. Nothing against it. It works. I just don't like working with it.
I use plaster for like my bridge abutments and my tunnel portals, but I don't use it for much else anymore. I did for my first layout, and I didn't really enjoy it for all that much. So I've gone to using different things and trying different methods out.
Yeah, that's the same boat as I'm in. I use plaster for abutments. I mean, even plaster roads are pretty decent, although I use something else that's a different kind of plaster for that. But yeah, no problem with that. I do all kinds of things. Plaster is a fine material. I have it here. I just don't like using it to cover a whole doggone layout with. It's spectacularly messy. But also probably has something to do with the fact that I do a lot of scenery very, very, very early in my construction process.
It's also fairly expensive.
Yeah, this ground group stuff is spectacularly cheap, man. I mean, my whole layout, I've got less than $100 worth of stuff in covering 100-something square feet of layout.
That's the whole reason why I'm only doing my rough terrain with plaster and not my smooth areas, because the plaster cloth is relatively expensive.
Oh yeah, for sure.
$12 for a 8-inch by 5-yard, 10 square feet roll.
Well, styrofoam is expensive, especially this green stuff I use is expensive. That's why I use it sparingly and only where trees are going to cover. And I often build up a lot of pink stuff and then put green on top of it. I mean, it's all there's a trade-off. I mean, you could probably build a layout for about the same amount of money either way. I don't care for the mess. I don't enjoy the process. So you got to find the technique that you enjoy working with, because the point of scenery really is that it's an absolute blast to do. That it's a great deal of fun. But if you hate the medium you're working in, it's unlikely to be as much fun. So you'll find what you like doing.
The thing I like to say, or I did, was I built a module first to figure out the techniques that I liked and that worked for me.
Me too.
So this is a question for everybody. It was asked earlier, and Robert touched on it a little bit. Do you guys use photos to set up your scenes? Because at this point in your layouts, I think a photo would be a good time to help you shape your layout and start building your defining characteristics.
Oh yeah.
Well, I'll
Yeah.
use photos a lot. I don't necessarily design off the photo, but I'll use photos for when I get into my scenery, for color coordinations. But the thing to remember about nature is it's not all one solid color. I mean, you could have a rock face and have 10, 20 different colors within that rock face.
So you guys know, like with the Model Railroad magazine, they always show like the angles that the photo shot on the person's layout. So I always I take the photo and I look at the angle that I'm trying to represent, and then I'll start to build off of that.
That will get more into our show later on the scene composition. I think when we start talking about that.
Well, we also talked about that pretty early in this process, or in this series as well. That, I do a lot of manipulation to force the viewer into a particular viewing angle. I mean, I don't know about force them, but I sure make it to where it's quite obvious that the most pleasant place to look at a certain scene from is at a certain scene. That I block the user's view somewhere in here, but there's a really good viewing spot on that side and one over here. And it's the exact opposite for the top deck. And so use your scenery to do that. I do use photos because I'm a prototype modeler. I'm modeling a real place. So, yes, I'm not putting trees exactly where they went. I'm just filling in trees, but I do want to capture the kind of flavor. There's a road going up the hill there, and I needed to capture the flavor of that.
Oh.
Lost the halo. Yeah.
And see, this is honestly the first time I've really used a photo reference to do scenery with. Usually it was just, I had an idea in my mind and I just kind of went with it and built on it. But we'll see how it turns out.
Now,
Let's talk about what you're trying to do.
Scene over here that I have completed. I did set the camera down at track level, take some pictures, see how I liked it, and I went in and made some modifications to that scene. Made some edits. I've added some stuff to the rock. We'll get into that though more when we get into the actual scenery of things and the techniques that I use.
Man, you're just trying to kill everybody's fun tonight, aren't you? Jeez Louise.
Color is key, and you will likely need photos to get the right coloration for the ground cover that we are going to talk about in the future. But shape matters too. This undulation and getting it. You want a certain effect that, I probably, and I have learned as I went along with some of my later modules. These are some of the first I built. I built one of these modules over here as my experiment first, and I didn't use ground glue because I hadn't found the stuff yet. It was all styrofoam, sanded perfectly smooth, and then covered. Now I've started using ground glue because it gives me more flexibility and forgiveness, and it's just a lot faster to try to get the foam perfectly correct. But I should have used photos more in the early phases 5 years ago than like I do today, because my scenery that I've done lately is much steeper because I just underestimated how steep the mountains really should be. And these are a lot milder than they should be. And that's why I was cutting trees off a lot of these, is because I'm going to correct for that. I'm going to make that steeper.
There's my one area that's relatively finished.
So from a geologist point of view, when you're doing your scenery, a lot of natural materials other than rock, if you have like a rock face, there's something called the angle of repose. And that's the natural ability of the material to stabilize itself at a certain angle. And in most general materials, such as like sand or gravel or general fill material, it's about 30 degrees. So if you go to any like soil, like you go to buy like soil or to a big aggregate yard, you'll see these big cones, and those cones are always 30 degrees because it's the natural angle that soil is stable at.
And what's that called? The angle of repose?
Angle of repose. Yeah.
Okay.
So that might help with some of your finding those natural angles that nature will put for you. Like I said, if you got a rock face, then it can be sheer, it can be overhanging, it can be whatever. But when you're working with flat, rolling hills or like Tullis off a mountainside, it's going to have a natural angle to it, and it's generally in that 20 to 30 degree angle range.
Well,
That's where I usually sprinkle it on and just let it fall.
Yeah, and that's how I do my ballast too. Natural fall.
That's right. Yeah, I do the same thing for ballast as well. But you get into these areas like Colorado, the Pacific Northwest, and the mountainous regions of Cascades or Appalachia. Honestly, the mountains are. It's hard to do this stuff from memory because the mountains will be steeper than you kind of think they are, or more steep. I'm not sure, but it's hard for you to just mentally figure that out exactly. And they are just a lot steeper than than I thought. By doing some calculations from what I've done, I found the area is the mountains here that the bridge is coming down. I've looked at pictures of it a lot and figured out that angle, and it's steep. It's steeper than 45.
This is kind of some of the angles that I was working with when I was checking my scenery and stuff. And also I'd bring it over here and do some angles similar to this.
Yes, talk about Kansas or Wisconsin, some of those places. Even the flattest places in the world. I mean, unless you're talking about the salt flats or something, all of it has quite a bit more undulation than you necessarily think it does, maybe. So, our photos are probably valuable regardless of what you're modeling.
There, now you can see a little bit more of my, not so bleached out when I shut the light off. There's some techniques in there that I'll get into more when we get into our scenery show.
All right. If we don't have any more questions for anybody else, I think we'll be the end of it. So we have a show coming up in 2 weeks. Again, as always, every 2 weeks on Saturday. We're going to cover ground covering. So we built the undulating terrain. We've talked about how we get that actual superstructure for that. We're going to talk about ground cover for dirt, the leaves, grass, etc. Just the scenic materials that make up that cover. So we'll see you again in 2 weeks for that. Of course, with Johnny's Thursday night show again next week as well. For of course, if you guys have any questions, please comment below. Of course, like and subscribe to this video so that and turn on the notifications if you want to be apprised of the next upcoming video when that happens. Or also, you can send us an email to any of us in our first names at modelroutinglive.com, or we have a questions channel email set up for this channel at empires@modelroutinglive.com. So comment here, send us an email to any of those methods or Facebook messages. Again, please like and subscribe to the videos, and we'll be back again in 2 weeks to cover ground cover. Thanks everybody for joining us. Have a good night.
Thanks everybody.